Hey, what's going on, everybody? Hope all of you are doing well. So, I'm going to be showing you guys my top 10 favorite horror films. Now, this is not going to be from the worst to the greatest or the greatest to the worst. No, these are just the 10 horror films that, out of all horror films that I have seen, are my 10 favorites. These are my go tos. There's just something I love about these movies that has me coming back every single time. So let's go ahead and get into it. So we're going to start off with a double header because in some way these are kind of connected with the story, and that is none other than Hellraiser and Hellbound Hellraiser 2. Absolutely love these movies. Now, the Hellraiser franchise and films in general are very interesting and unique in their own way. But when it comes to the series, the first two are my go-to films, especially the second film. But what I like about these movies is that one, it just has the creep factor all over it, especially the scenes that don't take place in hell and we don't see the Cenobites. And then when we get to the Cenobites, yeah, it could be very terrifying. And I do like the whole story and the whole mythology and the mystery of this puzzle box, and just everything that follows is just very unique in its own way. And the score for this, love it. Probably one of my top favorite scores of all time when it comes to a horror film. So yeah, Hellraiser and Hellbound Hellraiser 2 are my go-to horror films. Next, we have A Nightmare on Elm Street. So, A Nightmare on Elm Street to me feels like it's a film we can relate to because let's be honest, we all do have dreams. We all have had nightmares. And to take that concept and create something very horrifying is awesome. Wes Craven definitely knew what he was doing, and what I like about Nightmare on Elm Street is just the whole story of this one individual who was so bad, and justice wasn't served to this individual that the residents of this town, the parents taking matters into their own hand and now kind of having to deal with the consequences is just truly terrifying. And the going back and revisiting the first movie, it is terrifying. Um, from the score to just specific moments in the film and Robert Englund's performance. I really, at times, wish that the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise did not go more towards the comedic route because I felt like if the franchise was done differently and somewhat in the right way, I truly believe it would have made Freddy Krueger one of the most terrifying horror villains of all time. But that's kind of not what we didn't get that. But go at least the first movie and maybe the first, three movies. It definitely has those terrifying moments, but nothing compares to the first movie. So it's always on my list. It's one of my just there's so many great things about it that I love, and it's one that to this day I still remember specific scenes, not just with the first movie but with some of the sequels as well. Next is Shocker. So Shocker is interesting because I always remembered when I was younger, every Friday, me and my family would go to Publix. My mother would do grocery shopping. There was a Little Caesars in this plaza. So they would put an order in for dinner. She'd go shopping, and then down this, plaza was a mom and pop's rental store, and we constantly rented movies every single Friday. Toys with Robin Williams is one that stands out for me. There's just so many we used to watch, and it was just a great tradition. And I always remember going into this mom and pop shop, this rental store, and looking at the video games and looking at all the covers of these tapes, ranging from the Toxic Avenger to Dolly Dearest, Child's Play 2 and 3. But I always remember seeing the cover for Shocker. The iconic, you know, uh, electric chair cover right there. And it was always one that just stood out. And not only that, but the film Popcorn was the same way. Those always stood out for me. And I would grab the tape, look at the back, read it, and that was slowly my introduction into horror. Excuse me. And it was always one of those movies that just stood out for me when it came to that cover. And just the love I have for this, I feel it's so underrated. And what I mean by being underrated, it's just a film that doesn't get talked about much. It's a film, that didn't necessarily got as popular as a lot of other horror films. And I feel like the character himself could have been a potential horror icon. Yeah, we know what happens at the end of this movie for those who have seen it, but in some way, like a lot of horror icons, they're not truly gone. And I feel like that would have been great for this character to come back and maybe, just maybe, tie in this character with Freddy Krueger, considering it is a Wes Craven film. So it would have been an interesting universe in some way, to some extent. But yeah, Shocker is just a fun one. Next is one of my all-time favorite horror anthologies. Not just my favorite horror film, but my favorite horror anthology, and that is Tales from the Hood. I remember back when I was a kid watching this on HBO, I think it was, and just really being entertained and not expecting the twist that we would get in this film. And the little segments that we get are very interesting, and it holds up. This movie, I feel, still holds up to this day. And this movie is over what I believe it's this year that marks the 30th year. Yeah, 95. So this marks the 30th anniversary. And I revisited this film. Was it last year or the year before? Somewhere around there. It was a couple of years ago. It was part of my Halloween horror series that I do every October. And after revisiting the film and realizing it still holds up is truly interesting in its own way, but also a really good thing, because when films with the source material and the subject matter that it's dealing with can still hold up, then I feel like it can definitely play in a positive way when it comes to other films. I mean, this film focuses on domestic violence, it focuses on police brutality, it focuses on racism. I mean, and those are things that still hold up, gang violence. So the fact that these segments focus on these very sensitive subject matters and still holds up, considering we're still dealing with those issues in today's society, just truly shows how remarkable and in some way wonderful this movie can be, because a lot of people can relate to this, and a lot of people can learn from this, in certain situations. And just, whoever wrote this, it was written by Rusty Cundiff. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. And executive producer was Spike Lee, and he also did Rusty Cundiff. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong. Also directed. He doesn't get enough credit. I wish there was a way to contact him and let him know how truly impactful his movie is, and how I feel it still relates to a lot of what's going on today. I think this movie, in some weird way, would be a great period piece. For like college or something. I don't know. Prevention counseling could be a film for people to watch, especially when you pay attention to the details of each story. It hits you in the fields, as my sister likes to say. So yeah, Tales from the Hood is such a great horror film and a great horror anthology. Everybody who worked on that film, A+ in my book. Some really well-known names like David Alan Grier is one of them. Who else was in this? There's a few other actors. Wings Hauser, who sadly, he passed away, last week? Or, yeah, I believe last week. You got, like I said, David Alan Grier is in this. The director also, I believe, has a he plays a character in this as well. Anthony Griffith, Joe Torre, Clarence Williams the third, who is fantastic in this movie. So yeah, really great cast, and highly recommend. Next is Society. This movie is weird. This is kind of the film that got me into like the horror films that deal with like weird alien creatures. I remember, I don't know why, but there was a couple scenes that always stood out for me. One was the main character being outside and noticing something weird about his family, and I think like worms and bugs and something like that. And then the orgy scene, the weird out of this world orgy scene. If you've seen the movie, you know very well what I'm talking about. But it was one of those scenes that stood out for me so much because it was just so weird. I could never know what the title of the movie was. Then when Arrow ended up, announcing this film when it got released, right away I knew. I was like, oh my god, I did not know this was the movie. Now, I do kind of regret, because at one point I did have this in my collection. I had the really cool collector's edition, which, was like an embossed slipcover. It was limited. It came with the comic, which I believe was like a sequel to the movie. And then, of course, your discs, And, I regret getting rid of that edition, but I still ended up getting the film after so many years. After that was released a few years back, I was able to get it again. But I got it, in the standard case, which is fine. And yeah, it's weird in its own way, but it did grow my love for just weird, I just had lunch not too long ago. I apologize. It drew that love for out of this world alien type horror films, just films that have a ridiculous plot in its own way that deal with things from another planet, basically. And definitely a weird one, but it's got tons of features which I need to dive into. But yeah, Society is just a weird one to watch. I feel like Society is one of those movies you can just have a really nice cold one and some Chinese food and just have a good time, laugh your butt off on specific scenes, and just be entertained after a long day. Next is The Gate. I remember watching The Gate as well on one of the movie channels. I don't know if it was Showtime, HBO. It was Encore. It was one of those. And I just remember just really enjoying it. Now, this is even though it's a horror film, it's more of a friendly horror film. There are some scenes that really stand out that are in some way can be gruesome, but it's not like your over-the-top horror films like you would expect, or terrifying horror films that have those jump scares. This has jump scares, but it's more, I wouldn't say family friendly, but it's more toned down. And I think the story itself is great. I think the characters are great. The score on this is fantastic, and just the appreciation for the practical effects that they used for this is awesome. So yeah, The Gate was one of those movies. Anytime it was on TV, I'd watch it because I loved it so much. And another one that deals with like creatures, not more like aliens, but more of creatures, and that's kind of how my love for creature features came into place. Alright guys, we are getting close. The next are going to be the last four. Next is Poltergeist. Poltergeist, what can you say about this movie that hasn't been said? First and foremost, the score for this is absolutely amazing. Another score that I would say would be in my top 10 favorites. The cast, I think, is great. The story, I think, is great. Yes, you do have scenes that are pretty gruesome, but everything else in some ways like toned down to some extent, which I think works really well. And I think that's why this movie has grown the cult following that it has. But what really stands out for me, and I apologize for some spoilers, but that scene more towards the end when I believe it's like his boss comes, right before their house pretty much disintegrates and, kind of disappears. And you realize that they only moved the headstones, they never removed the deceased bodies, because it is mentioned that the homes in that neighborhood were built on basically a gravesite. It was a cemetery. And the who I want to say not the real estate, but whoever owned the property and that land decided to not move the deceased to another location. No, they left, built on top, and then moved the headstones. And that line where our main lead, which is what's his name, Craig T. Nelson, you move the headstones, you didn't move the bodies. When that line with the score playing, very terrifying. That stuff will give you goosebumps. So yeah, Poltergeist. God, such a good movie. This is such a great vampire film, The Lost Boys. So I remember watching The Lost Boys for the first time on TBS. It was at the time when TBS was doing their dinner and a movie. They kind of still do it, but to me, their dinner and a movie back in the 90s was 10 times better, especially the early 90s, because their dishes that they were making kind of had a relation to the film they were watching. And they did it with a lot of movies. Lost Boys, Jaws. I think that's the only two that stand out. But a dinner and a movie, I remember, I think it was like a weekend series. They would do it on like a Friday or a Saturday, at least from what I remember. And you had your hosts, they would go and, the movie would play, and, they'd cut back to that segment, to the two hosts and them cooking the food. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Every time I try to do a video after something, I always got to burp. So, right before they went to commercial break, they would do this segment with the hosts, talk about the food and what they're making. I think they would have like a well-known chef with them, making food that kind of had, a theme to it with the movie they were watching. And then they go on commercial break. And I also believe they would like share some really cool movie facts, as well as right before they go into commercial. And of course it would go back to the segment before we went back to the movie. And that's kind of how I got into this movie and ended up growing a love for it. I mean, I've had this on DVD, I've had it on Blu-ray, and now finally to have it on 4K. And it looks amazing on 4K. I will not lie on that. I mean, this movie really looked great. I need to watch it on my TV, my new TV that I have now, that I got for Christmas a couple years ago, because when I watched the film, it was on my Vizio, which ended up basically dying on me because it fried, because it ended up getting struck by lightning, because in Florida we seem to have thunderstorms every single day. I'm being sarcastic about that, but that's what ended up happening. So I ended up getting a new TV, and I haven't watched this one yet, so I need to. I've seen it. I've done a review for it. I just haven't watched it on the new TV because I have like an OLED or a QLED, one of those TVs, and a lot of movies I've put in there and watched look 10 times better compared to the TV I had before the Vizio. So a lot of movies I need to revisit to see how much better they look. So Lost Boys is on that list. But Lost Boys is a fun vampire film, great cast. Sadly, a lot of the actors have passed, which is unfortunate. And there's a lot of cool facts about this movie that I would highly recommend checking out on YouTube. So yeah, Lost Boys, fun vampire flick. Next is The Blob, another one that kind of grew the love for not only alien type horror films but creature features. Now, of course, this is a remake, and arguably one of the best remakes out there compared to other movies. Of course, the original had Steve McQueen, I believe, and that still has a fan base. It's another film that's really good, and I like the original. I know there's a Criterion release, and I would like to get that movie. I do like the original, but the remake, holy crap, do they step it up, and they don't hold anything back. And again, I'm going to mention spoilers, ranging from eating children. Yes, they eat, the blob itself eats a child. It pulls a diner worker through a sink, and it ends up eating a waitress in a phone booth. Remember phone booths? I do. So I'm just like, holy crap, this movie does not hold back. They definitely step it up. Compared to the original, oh, they really step it up. And, again, another spoiler, it potentially led off for what could have possibly been a sequel, which is unfortunate. But yeah, the Blob is so good. Looking back, yes, some of the scenes with the Blob can be out of place, but it's not enough to turn you off from the movie. It's expected with a lot of older movies, but it's still entertaining. The score to this is fantastic, and just the fact that you have all these these characters trying to figure out how to stop it, and there's that possibility they may not be able to, just really intensifies those moments, especially with the score. So makes the movie really entertaining. And another scene that stands out, and again, spoilers, is I believe it's the hospital scene when the Blob eats the boyfriend, and the girlfriend's trying to grab his hand, and we see that iconic scene. I don't believe the reversible artwork has it. Is there reversible artwork on here? There is. Yes, it's this. As you guys can see, that iconic scene is absolutely terrifying. So yeah, the Blob, man, just a really fun one to watch every time, and it grew my love, like I said, for aliens type horror films and creature features. There was a couple, like Society, that I mentioned that grew my love for those alien and creature feature type films. Next, and last but not least, is Fright Night. So Fright Night, another one I used to watch on TBS. Back in the day when TBS was actually a great channel, and instead of playing Marvel movies and any other slightly new releases, they were playing classics, ranging from anything to like Little Giants, Fright Night, Lost Boys. I mean, you got a lot of classic 90s stuff. Arnold action films, ranging from Eraser to True Lies to, I mean, there was just so many great movies that would come out during the 90s and be aired. I mean, you could spend a good Saturday most of your time watching movies on their channel because they had so much, and they gave you a variety. It was like you'd go from a kid movie, within a couple hours you go into an action film, a couple hours you'd go into a classic horror film, whether that was a Friday the 13th, Fright Night, Lost Boys, Jaws. It could be anything, and they didn't wait once a specific time of the year. They played this every time, and they would do like some cool things like a dinner and a movie. It wasn't just horror films. I think they did like action films. I remember Kindergarten Cop, Last Action Hero. Like, there's a lot of movies on TBS and TNT that they would air, and now they're not the same. And come on now, let's get a lot of these classic shows back on. But yeah, Fright Night, absolutely love this movie. The score is great. It's kind of the Boy Who Cried Wolf story, but done in a vampire horror type of way. The cast is fantastic. Just really adds to the depth of their acting. I feel with this movie, and just the score and just everything, the story. Yeah, I wish I could say more, but I think at this point everyone has seen this movie to kind of give their own opinion, and everything that has been said has been said. But yeah, I cannot recommend this movie enough to anybody out there. I always bring it up to people because a lot of people have never seen this movie, and I always recommend that they need to watch because it's really, really good. And I bring up that it's kind of its own The Boy Who Cried Wolf type of story, where nobody's believing him, and he's trying to tell the truth about what's going on, and yeah. So yeah, those are my top 10 favorite horror films. These are the movies that I just absolutely love. They grew the horror genre, and the love for the horror genre in me. As I progressed of getting older, there was more horror films I got into. Full Moon, was some of the earlier stuff is what got me in as well, like The Puppet Master, which is my all-time favorite franchise, Demonic Toys, Subspecies, I believe it's called. So yeah, my love for horror grew over the years, and really it's my father who got me into horror, because he used to watch the Full Moon features films. He would rent them from the rental store, and at that time, I guess he enjoyed them. As you look back and you get older, you realize, yeah, they're terrible, but in a good way. And then I think before that, I think Child's Play was my first movie I watched when I was about maybe two or three. So yeah, my love for horror has always been there. My dad's the reason why I got into the Phantasm series, which is a favorite. Not in my top 10. I would say that would be more in my top 20. Or top 15, but what I showed you guys are the musts for me, and that's why they made the top 10 list. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I would love to know what your top 10 favorite horror movies of all time are. These are mine, and if you've seen any of these movies, let me know what your thoughts are on these movies if you've seen them. Don't forget to subscribe, give this video a like. I'm Film Talk with Mikey, and until next time, guys, we'll talk films. You guys have a good one. Take care, and I will see you next time. Peace.